Poland, land of 1,000 lakes, now in the news for all the wrong reasons. In this video, we're going to talk about how Poland is forcing an election in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic. Why is the ruling Law and Justice Party in such a rush to have elections? Why can't they be delayed? This controversy seems to be part of a consistent pattern of the dismantling of Poland's checks and balances by the conservative Law and Justice Party. And so we'll trace the rise to power of the PiS and Poland's slide into authoritarianism. So Poland is in the middle of a huge controversy. The presidential election was scheduled for May 10th. But of course, in the past few weeks, just like in every other country, drastic measures have been taken against the coronavirus, including a stay-at-home order. There's a ban on public gatherings of more than 2 people. Yet somehow, an election can take place. So this is how it happened. You see, despite there being serious measures against the coronavirus, the government has not declared a state of emergency, and there's a very specific reason for that. You see, the Polish constitution states that whenever a state of emergency is declared, there cannot be any election, and there cannot be an election for 90 days after the end of the state of emergency. This means that if the government declared a state of emergency, the election would be postponed for minimum 3 months. But initially, the government wanted elections to take place as normal, despite the coronavirus restrictions. So people would go and vote while maintaining social distancing rules. Now, even if people followed social distancing rules to the letter, it's estimated that minimum 135,000 new infections would arise from holding normal elections. So instead, the ruling Law and Justice Party, the PiS, proposed holding an election by post or absentee ballot. Despite the PiS having a majority in Parliament voted against this bill with a tie, 228 to 228. But this was only because Deputy Prime Minister Jarosław Gowin resigned because he disagreed with holding the election in May. The following day, party discipline was enforced, and the bill went through, 230 to 226. It now has to go to the Senate, which, unlike the lower house of the Polish parliament, is controlled by the opposition. The Senate could delay voting on the bill for up to 30 days, which would be days before the election day. Too short to organize an election. But the problem is this. The bill containing the election date also contains the economic stimulus package for Polish workers and businesses. So the opposition senators are under massive pressure to vote yes for the bill. But there are multiple reasons why holding an election, even an election by post, at this time is irresponsible. There cannot be a free and fair election during a pandemic, because the opposition is not able to do any campaigning, while the president is on TV every single day. Millions of Poles living abroad would not be able to vote due to the lockdown. On top of that, 72% of the Polish people think that the election should be postponed, while 55.4% said that they would not vote if elections were held anyway. But the biggest thing is that there's no way that the Polish Postal Service can organize a nationwide postal election in the space of 3 weeks and ensure that there is no fraud. It's also not clear that voting by post is safe from coronavirus, as the virus can survive on paper for 3 hours and on cardboard for up to 24 hours. So why is the PiS in such a hurry? Well, the reason is simple. Like in other countries, the coronavirus is going to push the economy into a recession. A bad economy means that President Andrzej Duda might not be re-elected. So the longer he waits, the less chance he has of winning the election. On top of that, just like in other countries, right now during the pandemic, there is a rally around the flag effect. People are standing behind their leader because of the crisis, and so Duda's approval ratings have shot up. The sooner he holds an election, the more he can benefit from this rally around the flag effect. On top of that, polls show that if the election were held during the pandemic, Andrzej Duda would win 65% of the vote, but if they were held after the quarantine ended, he would only win 44%, because although most people would not vote, PiS supporters would show up to vote. But the opposition are not clean either. Crisis or no crisis, Andrzej Duda was polling well ahead of the other candidates at 51%, which means that he would win a presidential election on the first round. But even if it went to a second round, he would still win with 60% of the vote. So by delaying the elections, the opposition benefits because it gives them more time to campaign and increase their poll ratings, especially if the election is held when the economy is down. On top of that, even if the election does go through, by boycotting it, they take away the legitimacy of the election and therefore the legitimacy of Andrzej Duda's presidency. At this point, there are only 3 ways to postpone the election. The government can declare a state of emergency, which it won't do because it wants the elections to happen. Parliament can change the constitution to increase the president's term of office, but the opposition would never agree to that. Or all the opposition candidates could drop out and boycott the election, because the Polish constitution doesn't allow elections to happen if there's only one candidate running. Main opposition leader Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska has already suspended her campaign. But even if all opposition candidates dropped out, the ruling party could just enlist a fake candidate to run against them and hold the election anyway. But it's important to understand that this election date shamble is not happening in isolation. The PiS has slowly shifted Poland in a more authoritarian direction, taking control of its media and judicial institutions, just like Viktor Orban did in Hungary, which we covered in the last video. So how did this happen? Just like in Hungary, Poland has been tarnished by the dark legacy of communism. The Law and Justice Party, the PiS, believe that there are still too many communist-era functionaries in government, and that therefore radical changes to Poland's institutions, including the media and the judiciary, are needed. So after winning a majority in 2015, they began with some radical changes. It started by cancelling the appointments of the judges nominated at the end of the previous administration. Then they changed the law to make it so that the Constitutional Court, rather than requiring a simple majority to make a decision, now needed a 2/3 majority, rendering it ineffective. Then, in 2018, they implemented a retirement law, which lowers the retirement age of all judges from 70 to 65, and also applies to sitting judges. So immediately, 40% of sitting judges were forced into retirement. They were then replaced by judges that were loyal to the PiS. In 2019, under the guise of rooting out communist influence and fighting corruption, the government established a disciplinary chamber that can punish judges. In other words, judges who don't toe the line of the PiS can have their salaries cut or even be dismissed, violating the independence of the Polish judiciary. With the judiciary in their hands, they then moved on to the media. They changed the law so that the Minister of the Treasury could fire the head of the Polish public TV and radio networks. Then, rather than an independent body appointing the heads of the public media, the Minister of the Treasury would do this, and he's of course a member of the PiS. Now they claimed that this was to counter media bias, but conveniently they fired all the people who happened to be critical of the government, such as Karolina Lewica. Now I must say that the PiS is not the only party that has done this. Back in 2007, when the liberal centre-right Civic Platform Party was in power, they also stacked the media with loyalists. But rather than creating a fair media landscape, the PiS is doing the same and going even further. They slapped a $415,000 fine on a private media company for giving negative coverage of protests in Poland, because apparently they were promoting illegal activity. And in an effort to consolidate power, they fired 11,000 civil servants. Now, all these actions have not gone unnoticed. There have been serious protests against some of these measures. So why is the PiS still so popular? The PiS has tapped into a popular feeling that Poland is westernizing too much and losing touch with its traditional Catholic identity. Hence, it supports a conservative social agenda, including banning abortion, clamping down on gay rights, and strong nationalism. But surprisingly, although it's very right-wing socially, the PiS actually supports left-wing economic policies, like giving 500 PLN for every child that a Polish family has, and increasing pension payouts to the elderly. This strange mix of populist conservative nationalism and redistributive social programs has proven to be radically effective, with the PiS winning majorities election after election. Now, for many of these changes, it's not clear that they are constitutional, but by ignoring the Supreme Court verdicts and packing the courts with loyal stooges, the PiS has managed to subvert the rule of law in Poland. But Poland is a member of the European Union, and one of the conditions for being part of the EU is upholding the rule of law. But this has brought Poland into conflict with the EU. After multiple warnings, in 2018, the EU invoked Article 7, which would allow the EU to revoke Poland's voting rights for violating the rule of law. But the problem is that to invoke Article 7, you need the unanimous support of all member states. But Hungary, which is also run by a right-wing authoritarian populist who subverts the rule of law, vetoed it. Essentially, Hungary and Poland protect each other, rendering the EU useless. At the same time, Poland is the largest net receiver of EU money. It's ironic. The EU, which was founded to uphold the rule of law, is now funding the dismantling of it. But don't be distracted by the Western media's focus on Poland's immigration policies. You can agree or disagree on immigration, but the issue at stake here is the systematic dismantling of Poland's democratic institutions. Under the leadership of the PiS, Poland is being transformed into an illiberal democracy. A country which still has majority rule and elections, but where all the checks and balances and institutions that make a democracy meaningful are missing. And a democracy without an independent judiciary or a free media is no democracy at all. The situation in Poland and Hungary shows us that we must be wary of rising authoritarian populism. As they say, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Tell me what kind of topics you guys want to hear about in the future. If you want more engaging political content, like, share, and subscribe, 'cause this was my take.